Afternoon, everyone. You're very welcome. I'm Bernadette O'Connell, and my job here is to introduce our speaker, Laurence Colleran. Laurence, you're very welcome, and we're very grateful for you taking the time out to talk to us about your green infrastructure in South Dublin County Council. We all use it as landscape architects now. So just to introduce Laurence, you might know him for the previous talk that he gave on the landscape and play areas, which was excellent. This time round, Laurence is going to talk to us about the green infrastructure in South Dublin. In his role, Laurence is responsible for overseeing the planning and development of parks and public green spaces, and he works closely with the planning department on new developments. Hazel, can you just mute anyone there who is just joining there? Thanks. Sorry, just back to Laurence. So Laurence has been actively involved in green infrastructure projects and the development of nature-based SUDs in the county, as well as recognising the benefits of enhancing habitats for biodiversity, which South Dublin strive to unlock in their high value. Yeah, apologies about that. So to avoid any more hiccups here, I'm just going to ask Laurence if he could start, and thank you very much, Laurence.
Okay, thanks very much, Bernie, and good afternoon to everyone. And thank you very much to the ILI for the invitation to speak about the Green Infrastructure Strategy. So I suppose to start off, as part of our County Development Plan 2022 to 2028, South Dublin adopted a green infrastructure approach to planning and development. So I'll briefly introduce what we mean by green infrastructure and then describe how we use it in the context of our planning system. So at a basic level, green infrastructure includes things like woodlands, parks, public open spaces, river corridors, wetlands, hedgerows, conservation areas. It includes Natura 2000 sites, walking and cycling routes, SUDS drainage features, green bridges and corridors. And these features all benefit biodiversity, but they also deliver benefits to people. And this is called ecosystem services. So ecosystem services include things like clean air and water, shelter, food, flood prevention, and also include things like the health and well-being benefits of contact with nature. So green infrastructure is also an important element of our economy and in attracting in the types of high-value employers that we want in the county. And again, this is evident if you visit our business parks, the likes of Grange Castle, where we have our big pharma. These places have high numbers of trees, they have wetlands, ponds, hedgerows, cycleways, and excellent walking and cycling infrastructure, as well as a lot of green infrastructure. In terms of the definition of green infrastructure, we use the EU definition. I won't read through it here, but basically it's about creating a network of interconnected habitats. And we're doing this to deliver social benefits, environmental benefits, and economic benefits. Now, green infrastructure as well can work at a variety of different levels. We use it in parks, we use it in neighborhoods, and we also use it at a county level. So I suppose it's easiest to consider how it works at a park level. So my colleagues in Public Realm have mapped all of our meadows in the county. They've mapped our hedgerows, they've mapped our woodlands. And by mapping all of these, we can see where the corridors connect, we can see where there's gaps in the corridors, and we can see where we need to strengthen them. So in the images you're looking at here in Timon Park, you can see where, we have large meadows here. Now, where you bring a meadow habitat next to a woodland habitat or a hedgerow habitat, you're creating a corridor or a connection between these, and they benefit each other. So all the insects that are attracted to these meadows here, they're a food source for the birds that you'll find nesting in these woodlands. We generally leave wide woodland verges along at the edge of the woodlands, and that provides nesting sites and overwintering sites for the insects. The birds that are eating the seeds and the insects here, their droppings are moving the plant material further along the corridor. So you can see by starting to bring these habitats together that we are creating these corridors. Mammals use the corridors, insects, birds use the corridors, but also people visiting our parks are benefiting from this contact with nature. And most people who use our parks report doing so for health and well-being, rather than for looking at ornamental flower displays or for sporting reasons. Most people are there to spend time in nature and benefit from that. Another feature of green infrastructure, which is very important, is that it's multifunctional. So in the 20 years that I've been in parks, there has been quite a change in terms of our focus, maybe further from a horticultural view of landscape and more towards an ecological view of landscape. So we're looking a lot more at the environmental health and the biodiversity benefits, as well as the health and well-being benefits of the landscape. Sustainable water management and ecology are also primary considerations in our work over purely amenity. So looking at these two different presentations of what could be in parks, the image on the left of the ornamental flower display, this offers nothing to biodiversity. It's high maintenance, it's sort of unsustainable, short-lived, requires all sorts of chemicals, herbicides, pesticides, and is relatively expensive. Versus the type of parks, if you visit, say, Clonborris now, or see some of the types of parks that are being developed now with wetlands, with large wildflower areas, a lot more native planting, a lot more naturalistic type design. And so you can see how these are multifunctional landscapes. They help with the flood prevention in the county, they help with biodiversity, and they also have amenity value. Just an example of how this is translated into our parks. This is a riparian corridor coming through Timon Park again, but it also integrates human needs. So we're using this as part of a natural play area. These natural areas are proven to be good for children's physical and mental health. They're good play environments. And when we did consultation on play and asked people, tell me where you played as a child, people describe, experiences in these sort of wilder places as being particularly beneficial to us. The multifunctional element of green infrastructure is not just confined to parks and open space. If we look at the roads here, the various different treatments of roads, on the top left there, you can see a road that's primary function is the efficient movement of traffic. There's been no consideration that the land to the left or the right may have been a habitat that was once connected across here. There seems to be no consideration that, diesel and oil drips out of these cars and flows into the surrounding landscape, or that there's air pollution or noise pollution caused by having a road here. So they've just looked at one particular function, that's the efficient movement of traffic. If you look to the left, top left, you can see, well, there was space allowed along here for tree planting. But those trees will take impurities out of the air. There was space for a drainage ditch along the side there. So oil, diesel that flows across the grass will be taken out of it. And there's a habitat created where the water sits alongside of the road. On roads like this, you'll also find the traffic moves slower. The people prefer these areas, that there's higher biodiversity value. People are more likely to walk and cycle in these areas. Again, looking at the bottom left, you have a street through an urban area. There are no street trees, there's no swales. It is very much about efficient movement of traffic. We find quite low numbers of people cycling in these areas, even when they're high density, compared to the area on the bottom right, where people are much more likely to walk and cycle when you have more attractive surroundings. There's going to be lower noise impact from the road where you have trees planted. You're going to have cleaner water, cleaner air, and you're going to have higher property values when you have multifunctional landscapes and integrate green infrastructure into the design. Looking at green infrastructure on a wider level, this is a map of Clonburris. Now, Clonburris is a new town that is currently being constructed between Lucan and Clondalkin. You can see the primary green infrastructure corridor through here is the Grand Canal. And that connects the Liffey flowing down through the centre of the country with the Dublin Bay biosphere in Dublin Bay. We've very high water quality on the Grand Canal, even passing through this area in Clondalkin. So this corridor is very important as a piece of green infrastructure. So when Clonburris was being laid out, it was very important that we connect this, and we use connections for this green infrastructure link right up through the new development. So the darker green lines that you can see there are what we call our primary green infrastructure corridors, and they're generally hedgerows that have been protected and will be protected, so that they're usually barony hedgerows or ones that have been there for quite a long time and have high biodiversity, and also, I suppose, heritage value. So they're protected, and the lighter green lines you can see are where new corridors have to be created. So every time a planning application comes in, they have to show how they are either protecting or enhancing the green infrastructure of the area. Here's just an example. Again, it's not perfect, but you can see this was a recently planted one of the local green infrastructure links through Clonburris. And you can see there, this is a SUDS feature where the water on that road is being treated very locally to where it falls. So the water is flowing across and flowing into these bioretention areas. These are planted with native plants. So the water is immediately getting treated when it flows in here. So when water, if there's oil on that and it sits on the surface, the sunlight is breaking it down, where eventually when this is fully vegetated, before it even reaches the base of this, some of it will be taken off in grasses. But it also offers a corridor for biodiversity and for nature right up through the urban environment. And as well as that, you know, it creates an interesting environment for children to grow up in and for people to live in. There is more greening on the streets. But I suppose what we're really important to do is put this into context of where the country's priorities are at the moment and where the priorities are for local government in Ireland. So undoubtedly the housing crisis is dominating everything that the local authorities are to do. We're very clear on who we work for. We're meant to represent the public good and to deliver for the public. And the big issue engaging people at the moment on a local level is the housing crisis. So naturally, as landscape architects, I'm assuming everyone here has an interest in protecting and enhancing our environment, especially in the era of climate change and preventing biodiversity loss. But this is not always top of the agenda. When people need houses, when they need places to work, when their schools need it, these are very important issues. And rather than us saying, well, deciding because we know better that the environment must come first, we have to understand methods of engaging with all this development that is needed in a way that is not going to overly harm the environment. So the projections on the number of houses needed in the country are quite varied. On just a population level, up to 2050, I think it's Sherry Fitzgerald suggested that we need 60 to 70,000 new homes. But there was also a Housing Commission report in the last couple of weeks that reckoned we might need up to 62,000 homes a year up to 2050. So whatever it is, this level of development has the potential to be very environmentally damaging. So it is very important that the planning system stays ahead of this, and we have strategies in place not to allow this to happen. We also can't put something in place that is going to make house building more difficult or be overly restrictive. Like, our county is committed to a certain level of development, and it's a job of people working in the planning system to facilitate that growth, not to stand on the sidelines and say you're not doing this right, or you're not doing that right. We have to come up with a method to allow this type of growth to happen. So again, as I said, there is a risk that all this development can be damaging. But we know the continued development of the county is necessary. And having a green infrastructure strategy allows us to deliver this housing and associated infrastructure without destroying our natural environments. It allows us to integrate corridors through our urban environments, and it allows nature to flourish and deliver the various ecosystem service benefits that I was talking about earlier. And it allows us, by having a strategy, we can start to address this biodiversity loss. But I suppose we didn't just come upon the green infrastructure strategy because of the housing issue. There's a lot more issues facing the council, and looking around the various departments that I work with in the planning. So with our water and drainage, we all know we're expecting an awful lot more rainfall than we've had in recent years. You know, our major rainfall events, there's going to be an extra 20%, or we have to account for an extra 20% in these large rainfall events. So with this increase in storm intensity, we have to be able to manage this flooding. Green infrastructure helps us with that. Our environmental staff will have measured pollution levels in our rivers. They'll know that there's increasing traffic will lead to poorer air quality. And there is, you know, a growing knowledge of the impact of air quality on people living in urban environments. Our heritage officer has a lot of concerns about the loss of biodiversity right around the county. We have to report back to the EU on species like bats, bat numbers. So again, there's a lot of concerns around biodiversity. Our economic development unit have to continue to attract investment and jobs into the county, and they want the right type of investments. A lot of the big companies we're trying to attract here have sell themselves a lot on their environmental credentials. So it's important that when they're looking for sites, that we can provide sites with the type of environments that they're looking for. Our road staff will be expected to roll out more and more mobility projects. They have a mandate to increase the numbers of people walking and cycling. And there's also a focus on road safety. How do we make our roads safer? There has been an increase in traffic deaths in recent years, and they're expected to address that. Our sport and recreation officers will note, as we found when we started looking at children's health for play, that there is a decline in physical activity across urban populations in Ireland. We are a country where we're seeing rising levels of obesity and lower levels of physical activity. Some of this can be attributed to what we call obesogenic environments, environments where you're less likely to walk and cycle based on the factors you're encountering in your environment. So do you have to cross a number of busy roads? Is there permeability? What factors make you more likely to jump in the car than to walk? So maybe green infrastructure can also help us with this. And I know in parks, we're also seeing, you know, the impacts of climate change. Our pitches are unplayable for much longer periods every year with waterlogging. And then we're also, on the other side of it, we're also experiencing drought conditions in the summer. We've seen a lot of tree losses due to drought. We're seeing increasing storm damage, and we're dealing with the impact of invasive species. We are seeing a lot more pressure on the space we have for amenity, recreation, and biodiversity. So if parks are going to have to take a role in water management and ensuring protection of biodiversity in the county, as well as meeting the demands for more pitches, more users. You know, we need to be moving towards more of this multifunctional type of landscape. These are all things that can be addressed with green infrastructure. So, as I said, environmental benefits, social and economic benefits, climate adaptation and mitigation. So, you know, again, we wanted a green infrastructure strategy that would not sit on a shelf, but would start to address all of these issues for us, deliver corridors for nature, remove pollutants from our air and water, protect against soil erosion, provide more sustainable travel, better environments for children, and even things like reduced stress, tourism benefits, greater civic pride. So I've spoken about green infrastructure at a parks level and a more regional level in Clonburris, but in terms of delivering a strategy across the county that made sense, how we went about doing that. So I suppose the basis of how we did it was based on this landscape character assessment that was carried out. So you can see a map of our county there. The south of the county is dominated by the Dublin Wicklow Mountains. Across the north of the county, you have the Liffey Valley. You can see the Grand Canal. You can see what other way with the Camac, the Dodder Valley. And we looked at these areas then and said, where are the core areas of biodiversity? And then where are stepping stone areas? So in order to develop corridors, you're trying to connect core areas of biodiversity and stepping stones to create these corridors. So this is our green infrastructure map of the county. Some of these corridors are already very strong, like the Dodder Valley corridor there. You can look at that on heat maps of Dublin City and you'll see a cool corridor running right along that. So that's already a strong corridor. Others, such as the M50 corridor, it's sort of a notional corridor. We have parks like Timon Park along there. You know, there is vegetation obviously either side of the motorway, and we are getting parcels of land along the M50. A crucial reason why this was selected as a primary corridor is that it transects the Liffey Valley corridor, the Grand Canal corridor, the Dodder Valley corridor. So it is tying together, it's creating these connections across the county. So we've ended up with 6 primary corridors and 17 secondary corridors. And how we go about building these corridors. So internally in the council, when our public realm staff are planning their operations, we have these corridors mapped out to quite a high degree of accuracy. We know where all our hedgerows are, where the tree planting areas are, where our woodland areas. You can see the areas here in purple. They are areas that they're managed as wildflower meadows. A lot of these bluer areas are maybe mini woodlands. We're managing woodland and hedgerow management happening. We allow for a lot of unmanaged spaces. We've been reducing spraying, especially in these corridors. We're partnering with local environmental groups. So if they want to carry out tree planting, we would talk to them. We'd look through our green infrastructure maps. We would identify areas in these corridors and look for the planting to happen there, so they're being strengthened, so that, you know, we're really doing things on a strategic level in order to strengthen our corridors. So, for instance, you can see the stretch of blue here along the M50. There was recently a new mini woodland put in along there. So that'll deliver ecosystem services. Obviously, it reduces noise from the M50. It will improve air quality. It improves the amenity for people walking in the park. And, you know, there's also huge benefits for the community being involved in environmental projects like this, involved in direct environmental action. The major place where we implement our green infrastructure policy is through the planning system. So every planning application coming into South Dublin now must demonstrate how the site will contribute to the protection or enhancement of green infrastructure of the county. So in the case of small scale developments, This will consist of usually a landscape plan where you're highlighting the green infrastructure elements on it. Are you providing for connections to the wider green infrastructure to show us the context of your site in terms of the overall county? Where a development is located close to or within a green infrastructure corridor, at a minimum, we'd be expecting them to retain the green infrastructure elements. So retaining hedgerows, retaining ditches, woodlands. And there's a strong emphasis on retaining green infrastructure assets, but also including things like nature-based sods to improve green infrastructure connection. So just as an example here of the type of information we're looking for when an application comes in, this is a screenshot of an application that came in along the Grand Canal corridor. So you can see here the arrows where there are existing hedgerows along the site. So the first thing I'm looking for here is what is proposed, is it going to break these connections? So I want to see that these connections are maintained right around the site. Oftentimes in our rural areas, we have almost unbroken series of hedgerows that could go on for 10 or 12 kilometers. So it might seem a small thing to take out 300 meters of hedgerow on an individual site. But when you look at a wider area and you say taking out that 300 meters of hedgerow is breaking a connection of maybe 10 kilometers of hedgerow, then we can see that it actually has a very big impact. So, and when it's pointed out, it becomes more important and people see the value of retaining it rather than say taking it out and replacing it. So on this site, you can see that a lot of the sods, that there are ponds developed right along the north of the site where it is connected to the Grand Canal corridor. And that's reflecting the characteristics of the corridor there again. Another thing that we really wanted to do, so this really is an example of how we're using green infrastructure to ensure any site is connected to the wider landscape. But we also wanted to have a way of determining the green infrastructure value of any given site. So previously, when an application would come into South Dublin and we were discussing the value of the site in terms of have they done enough for biodiversity, it was always been argued that, well, we're bending over backwards on this site. We've done everything we can. You're expecting too much. This gives us, I suppose, a way of evaluating it that is sort of a non-subjective way. So basically, when you come in with a planning application, as part of your application, you will have filled out this table. You put in say the area of your site, and then you include all of the green elements on the site, and that gives you a ratio at the end. So the green space factor is like a ratio of green to grey or permeable to grey surfaces. And it really is a tool for implementing green infrastructure on a site. And to achieve a good score, developers need to retain as many of the green features as possible and incorporate as many greening measures as possible. So things like retaining hedgerows, trees, and water bodies have very high scores. Whereas if you remove all the vegetation on the site prior to making an application, it can be very difficult to achieve the required score. And really what this has done is it has ensured that landscape architects are involved in the design process at a much earlier stage. So rather than the architects deciding, this is the layout of the site, this is where the entrances are going, we're going to take out the hedgerows, this is where the green space is going to go. That approach, you probably fail your green space factor. So you need to understand what elements are going to get you the highest score, because I won't be able to, in my report, recommend that a planning application is granted if they're not meeting the green space factor. So how has this impacted, I suppose, in the last year and a half, 2 years since the development plan has been in operation? Well, we're immediately seeing a change in the type of landscapes that are coming in for approval. Most have still not come through the system, given the time from planning to development. But we're seeing a lot more sites where you can immediately see that you're getting all of this sustainable water management, you're seeing corridors for nature, and you're really seeing landscape architects taking this on board and delivering, I suppose, very different types of landscapes to what we were getting previously. It's not all easy sailing. There are lots of challenges, and I suppose even internally in the council, it has created a lot of issues between various departments in terms of how everyone's objectives are being met. And this was a particular site in the west of the county where we had a local green infrastructure corridor along a road, but the lands either side of it were zoned for economic development. Now, what that meant was these roads were just not wide enough for the articulated vehicles required for this type of to service industrial units. So originally an application came in, or a proposal came in, that said, right, we need to take away the hedges on both sides of the road. We need to take away the trees. We're going to widen the road. Our roads department require walking and cycling paths on new roads, so they'd be put in, and then they would replace the hedgerows on either side. They were going to pipe the ditches. So from what you have here, an attractive looking country road, everything was going to have to be wiped out in order to facilitate the type of road that was needed. We went back, between our own roads department and the applicant, and got them to relook at it. We explained that in a green infrastructure corridor, you have to look to protect and enhance what is there. The idea of wiping everything out and then replacing it doesn't fit with our green infrastructure objectives. And it was a really successful engagement. The proposal that came back was, basically what the proposal was, they said, right, we'll take out the grass verges on both sides, we'll widen out the road up to the ditches, but then we'll move the walking and cycling paths and the drainage infrastructure to the inside. So what we've ended up with here, and again, this took compromise from our own roads department, was that we got the road widths that were required. We got the walking and cycling routes in possibly a far more attractive area. And then the drainage infrastructure, there was huge wetlands proposed. So this green infrastructure corridor is actually much stronger now, since this, this design will provide for a much stronger green links right throughout this area. These lands will be opened up for the development that is needed. So this is, I suppose, a very successful example of how we've integrated into a difficult site. We are seeing more and more landscapes where nature is a lot more to the forefront. What was in the past undergrounded water and underground tanks is now on the surface. And there is an acceptance, and I think there is a change in public perception of what's acceptable or what's attractive. So here is an area this is Tandy's Lane Park. Now this was built before a green infrastructure strategy, but implements a lot of what we're looking for. This area is wet at certain times, it's dry at certain times, and that has meant that we have really high biodiversity in terms of the plants that are there. You're going into these areas and the amount of plant and insect life is really, really encouraging. And people are really happy to engage in these more natural areas. They're not looking for areas to be made sterilized or clean or have all the grass tightly cut. There is an acceptance of this. And we're seeing, even in residential areas, not just in parks, we're seeing the types of landscapes are changing, and we're seeing nature integrated into roadsides, into residential areas, into business parks, data centers, schools. sports clubs, and a variety of sites where nature was never previously seen as a major priority. So I suppose at the start, we were very uncertain about how the green infrastructure strategy would be received. And there was quite a worry about, would it be considered unreasonable or sort of nonsense, or an extra thing that was going to slow down the development and act against the interests of the county, which are, all of this development is needed. And we really did not want that to happen. And what we've seen is that with our green infrastructure strategy in place, we are still facilitating large-scale developments, but the design of these developments has increased a lot. We're still facilitating economic development. Our business parks, places like this, are just much higher in nature. They're still happening. And there's a huge emphasis on the protection of nature on all development sites. The green space factor means that developers actually benefit from retaining the nature that's on site, retaining hedgerows, woodlands, watercourses. It has meant that you won't pass your green space factor if you're not retaining features and implementing natural drainage. So we're seeing natural drainage on every site now. We don't get sites in that water's going straight to gullies, straight to underground attenuation tanks. So we're seeing a huge improvement on that. The success of the strategy has really relied on the skills and innovation of the landscape architects who are implementing it. All of the images I've shown have not been things that have been solutions that have been developed by the council. All of this is coming from landscape architects. And I know in the UK, they've gone for this now biodiversity net gain, and there's probably a lot more input from ecologists on this. Our system relies on landscape architects probably a lot more than ecologists. All of that environmental work still has to happen. But in terms of the delivery, this has been the innovation that's happening. Everything is coming from the landscape architects. I suppose we're setting the parameters of it. But what we're seeing much better landscapes coming in, and these are they're beneficial to biodiversity, but they're also beneficial to the people living in these counties. They're living in much healthier environments. We are getting support from it from our roads department, architects, planning and water and drainage teams. We're seeing internally in our own parks departments, we're seeing green infrastructure being used in the planning and operation and management of our own parks. Again, I mentioned earlier the Miyawaki woodlands, and that where community groups who are going to be planting trees come in, look at our strategy and decide where in the county it would be most beneficial to put in these mini woodlands. We're using it every day in every planning application that comes in. And we're seeing that it really is, I think, a very good example of how planning should allow all of this development that's required in the country, while still appreciating that we do have a climate and biodiversity emergency. So I'll probably finish up here. I'd just, again, thanks very much for offering me the opportunity to speak on this. And I'm very happy to take any questions or to receive any feedback. So thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Laurence. You really are leading the way in South Dublin in green and blue infrastructure. We have mostly compliments here in the chat, but perhaps some people could actually ask Laurence. Christos, would you be able to unmute and ask Laurence anything about your comment there?
It's again a compliment. Thank you very much, Laurence. We were based in South Dublin, and we've worked on several projects that require the green infrastructure plans, and it was definitely a great addition and still is, and we do hope to see a lot more of that. And it's great to see that we've received your support as well, your team support, to clarify some things, especially at the beginning of the implementation of the green infrastructure. If we were to point anything out, it'd be that maybe some refining would be required for the green space factor, because there are some elements that are duplicated within it that are expected to be duplicated, but it might be worth clarifying those instructions a little bit more. But all in all, it's a great start, and would very much like to see a lot more of that being implemented in other councils as well, just for the reasons you've mentioned earlier. So yeah, well done.
Yeah, I agree. What about now, Alistair, you've got a good question in there about management of the ecological zones. Would you like to unmute, Alistair, and perhaps chat to Laurence about exactly what you mean there?
Hi, Laurence. Thanks for that great presentation. Would you be able to just elaborate a little bit on the types of machinery you use, the frequency, how we should be designing these meadows so that they can be easily maintained in a practical way? What do you do? Do you cut and remove, and where do you remove them to? And do we need places on sites to put material, that sort of thing?
Yep, a very good question. And I suppose we're learning as we go on this too. So generally with our meadows, we have at the moment 190 hectares of wildflower meadows, which we're actively managing. That's on a 1 cut per year. And it is, at the moment, it's cut by an agricultural contractor who uses the material as animal feed. So it comes in with a large zero grazer, cuts and removes straight away. The recommendation may be with wildflower meadows that you cut, leave the material on the ground to set seed, and then remove. But we've had issues in South Dublin, as in many urban areas, of fires being lit. And where you have a fire coming across a meadow and you have housing and you have hedgerows and everything nearby, it's just not a risk that people want near them. So our machinery comes in, it's cut and remove in one go. So we're not storing this material anywhere. So generally what's important in terms of where you have these meadows is that if you have tree planting, we don't want them dotted everywhere across the landscape. We'd prefer the trees kept in clumps so that we can cut around outside it, so that large machinery can move around it. And there is a growing acceptance of areas under trees that you might say, well, we're never going to cut the grass there. It's not detrimental to the growth of the trees. It's probably beneficial to the trees in terms of delivering their biodiversity benefits, that there is grass and everything growing up underneath them. So yeah, just to allow the tractor you need about 2.5 meters in width. And in other areas then, the wildflowers in things like swales or bioretention tree pits, we would use a tractor with a flail, and that would be cut once in the year and the material taken away. So yeah, I hope that has answered it.
Thanks. Yeah, that's useful.
Thanks, Laurence. We've got 3 or 4 more. John, you wanted to ask Laurence, do you insist on the native species, or is there room for anything else that could be brought in?
Yeah, in terms of the green space factor, it is largely vegetation. We're not always looking at exactly what that is. Obviously, we still agree landscape plans, as we have always done. So we'll be looking at species, but no, it's not. We don't insist on native only planting.
Yeah, thanks, Laurence. Christy, you're very welcome there. Christy wanted to ask you, Laurence, can you mention anything about nature-based solutions, which seems to be replacing green infrastructure? They're both very much of the same thing and can be used in the same context. But do you have any mention of nature-based solutions in your green infrastructure plan, Laurence?
Yeah, so I suppose it relies very heavily on nature-based solutions, and for many years there was objectives in South Dublin that we would have nature-based drainage or natural suds, that underground tanks would not be permitted. But yet on every single development, they always had underground tanks. Something that was very important before we had our green infrastructure strategy was bringing out our SUDS guidance. And once we had the SUDS guidance document with very clear instructions on how it had to be implemented, if you're not having a tank, what can you do? And South Dublin has very, very good guidance on that. And you won't pass the green space factor without sustainable drainage or nature-based solutions on the site. So they are very, very much linked.
Yeah, thanks, Laurence. It might be just worth pointing out to everyone that Engineers Ireland are hosting a lunchtime seminar on Thursday, the 21st of November, in their buildings in Ballsbridge on the Law Pro, that's the local authority waters programme on nature-based solutions, the new guidance document. It's a free seminar, 10 till 2, and it's always a really good seminar to go to. So it's free if anyone wants to go to that, and you can email I think Elva's the name of the lady. Yeah, Elva Doherty in Engineers Ireland to get an invite to that. Sorry, just to go back then, Laurence, I think Thorsten had a very good point there about does your strategy provide separate footpaths and cycle paths in the carriageway? Thorsten, do you want to unmute and just elaborate on that? Can you see that that query there, Laurence, in the chat?
Sorry, I'm just opening it now.
I can read it out for you again. It says, yeah, you got that there, Laurence. Yeah.
Well, I see. Possible assessment to provide separate footpath and cycle path from carriageway. I suppose we haven't had. It hasn't come up very often. The example I showed there, generally the footpath and cycle path is alongside the road. That was the first time that it really came into conflict, where provision of the footpath and cycle path would have knocked out all of the existing green infrastructure elements. But what I can say is that our roads department have been very supportive, and in terms of when they're looking for things, and if it's conflicting with the green infrastructure strategy, they are saying, okay, we accept things have to be done differently, and they are working with us on it, and they are taking the green infrastructure strategy very seriously. And also, we have found there's been huge acceptance from industry of this, and the idea of like creating corridors and connections, and all the solutions are coming from private industry, from the landscape architects. So people are coming into us with the solutions. So yeah, I hope that has answered it.
Yeah. Some good questions, Laurence, on management of the green infrastructure areas. ILA has a good question there about on the suds retention basins which get flooded, and and are they suitable as amenity areas? We certainly would include them as amenity areas, but does South Dublin Council include these as your amenity area quota?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
The biggest change in getting nature-based solutions implemented in our county anyway was in the last development plan. There was an objective put in that any drainage infrastructure on public open space had to be natural in character. So that meant that if you wanted to use an underground tank, you couldn't count that as public open space. So that was a huge change. Suddenly, natural SUDs could be done where previously it couldn't be done. Our SUDS guidance document shows how we can integrate it. So what you really want to avoid is to have a green area with a detention basin, which is level on the bottom, because on one rainfall event, you have a small bit of water right across the bottom of this basin, and the entire area is muddy and unusable and not suitable for play. So our guidance document describes how if everything is tilted slightly to one side, you end up with a low flow channel, which takes low rainfall day-to-day events. That channel will probably be higher in biodiversity because it is sort of a wetland habitat. You get your landscape architect, they can put boulders there, they can put logs across it, it becomes a sort of a play area. And then the whole rest of the green area remains dry until there is a major rainfall event and the area is actually used for water retention. We find that SUDS makes the play areas far more interesting as well. So yes, yeah, on South Dublin's website, you can download our SUDS guidance document. It's very good information on that.
Yeah, there's a lot of questions there on maintaining the water. And yeah, Laurence, do you insist on the standards in the Syria SUDS manual for your for access to any of the water courses or SUDS features?
I suppose the our SUDS manual was written by McCloy's, who were also involved in developing who also wrote the original Syria manual. Yeah. So there's a huge amount of crossover in both.
Yeah.
But I suppose our guidance was very specific to what's acceptable in our county, to our roads engineers, to our architects and drainage engineers as well.
Yeah, I might just ask you one more kind of landscape planning issue, Laurence. Do you liaise with your adjoining counties on the green infrastructure corridors so that they would extend naturally outside your county and connect up to their programme of developing their green infrastructure corridors?
Yeah, so in the development of our strategy, definitely in terms of day-to-day, the management of the corridors, probably not. But say we had a planning application recently which was refused because there was a break in the link between a corridor in South Dublin and a connecting corridor in Dunleary. They had identified a corridor there. So we were aware of that and we didn't want to break a link. So
that's a very good point. Yeah, continuity of those. Yeah, and we'll just take one last question. It's a good question from Lisa and there, Laurence, talking about taking in charge SUDS features. She's saying, is it roads or parks section? Lisa, have I got that right? You can unmute to join that chat.
Yeah, can you hear me?
We can hear you, Lisa.
Yeah, no, I'm just curious. You go to the council, we're sort of faced with this issue at the moment. So, like, who maintains or manages the swales or rain gardens that are put in? Do you know what I mean? Is it because it's water coming off roads, but yet they're situated in green areas and open spaces, and who maintains those?
Yeah, in South Dublin, it is the Public Realm Department who will be managing that. Now, our water section, you know, maybe the staff on the ground will get a bit of a shock when all new developments are coming in with a lot more suds, and you know, we'll maybe have to change a bit in terms of how we're managing. Our own water section is changing. We have a new section called natural water, which has been set up. So we'll see, is there more of a role for drainage in, but at the moment, the SUDS features are considered landscape features. They have to be integrated into the landscape. So it is currently with public realm or parks to maintain them. So we agree the taking in charge for that.
Okay, thank you.
That's great. Yeah, thank you very much, Lisa. We're going to stop it there. We had over 100 people on the call, Laurence. Well done. It's a massively interesting subject, and just to thank you everybody for joining in. You've got about 4 minutes left for your lunch, and once again thank you to Laurence. You bring the real subjects to us, Laurence, and congratulations on your team and how you've addressed this and liaised with individual practitioners to understand it. You're a great help to our team as well. So yeah, thank you very much again, Laurence.
Okay, all right. Thanks very much.
And thank you, everyone.